can't lie, I'm not really used to seeing my audience. In September 2022, Hurricane Ian ravaged Florida. Entire parts of the state underwater. Fort Myers and Sanibel Island wiped clean. Hundreds of thousands of properties damaged. Billions of dollars lost. More than 150 people dead. At the time, I was just starting my career as a broadcast journalist. Some of my colleagues went down to Southwest Florida to cover the aftermath. They went straight into the affected areas, taking boats through flooded landscapes to get to people who were struggling and share their stories. When they came back, they shared stories of people who had just lost everything. Their homes, their cars, their jobs, had nothing left. And they told the newsroom how they gave them bottles of water, cans of soda, whatever they had on hand, just to help out, just to be human. I thought it was a pretty kind, albeit small gesture. Until newsroom management caught wind of it. Was the value $20 or more? If it was, you shouldn't have done that. It's a violation of our ethics codes. Then the stories got published. Colleagues posted videos of themselves hearing their stories broadcast for the first time. You'd hear the announcer say, "Hurricane Ian is one of the deadliest storms in US history." And they cheered. They cheered. You know, one of my colleagues even took to social media to brag about his story, saying something along the lines of, "While I mourn the incredibly tragic loss of life, I'm so grateful for this opportunity." I thought you might say that. It's shocking to hear out loud, but it's not out of the ordinary. This is the culture that my colleagues and I were taught to create, to respect, and to play along with every single day. A culture you're expected to uphold or be treated like an outcast. A culture where caring too much about the people you're supposed to serve crosses a line. I've worked as a journalist in multiple newsrooms with coverage played all across the country. But these ethical discussions and run-ins have always stuck out with me. They reveal what I think is the biggest problem with the journalism industry. Journalism has become so systematic and lifeless that it has lost its human touch. There are honest problems with journalism, not just conspiracy theories from people who want to burn it all down. As someone from inside it, who believes in its power and wants it to continue to exist, I want to propose how we can fix this. Now, to do that, we first need to understand what humanity journalism lacks and why it's costing us the trust of our audiences. Then, and only then, can we truly propose how to fix it. Starting with the what. What exactly has journalism lost? And how did we get so far from the people we're supposed to serve? There's not just one answer to this. There are several factors at play here, from the business model to the ethics codes, to the market strategy, to the pressures journalists face. And all of these things are sort of connected. So allow me to explain. At face value, journalism seems pretty simple. You go out into your community, you find a story, and you share it. I mean, it's community service. I mean, certainly not profitable. That leads to corner cutting. How do we get the most out of our reporters while they're on the clock? In TV, you owe your boss a story that's with a script and a video by the early afternoon. And usually they'll ask you to interview a certain number of people about that story, but they'll usually reduce those people to what they call in the industry sound. And you do that every single day, just repeating this process to get all the required pieces. And through all this, journalists are supposed to be objective. But what does that really even mean? The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics tells journalists to strive for independence and avoid anything that could even appear to be bias. The RTDNA, that's the Radio, Television, and Digital News Association, tells journalists to avoid compromising credibility. Now, neither of these things sounds unreasonable, right? But they're not the same. Sometimes finding the best solutions means ethics codes go at odds with each other, and very few of these situations are black and white. But journalists sometimes treat these rules like they're written in stone. And we've seen how that plays out with situations like Hurricane Ian. Journalists tell people they're our neighbors, but they can't act like it. They can't show anything that even resembles an opinion, and with that goes their personalities. Media executives are reluctant to let journalists build personal brands. They want them to serve more like figureheads for the company. So they put up these facades, getting further and further away from themselves. Now that's intentional, perhaps due to the very nature of the industry itself. You see, it's a small industry, and ratings are declining across the board. Every region that local news stations cover is considered a market, which Nielsen ranks by size. New York is number 1, Los Angeles is number 2, Gainesville's number 157. So when journalists first get out of college, they don't have the experience to go to a New York or Los Angeles. So many of them end up coming to a place the size of Gainesville, a place they've maybe never heard of, certainly never been to, because that's where they have to go to do their time. And from what I've seen, this creates resentment of these small towns where real people live and have real problems. I have literally had colleagues count down the days until they can go anywhere else. You're dropped into a community overnight and expected to immediately understand it, but not to get too close. So you're constantly at arm's length, trying to avoid attachment until your 2-year contract is up and you can move on to a bigger market. TV executives understand this, so they make their journalists disposable. And journalists feel this. In 2024, the Poynter Institute published findings from a survey done by Muckrack. You can think of Muckrack like LinkedIn for journalists. It showed that more than half of respondents seriously considered quitting their jobs that year because they felt overwhelmed, unappreciated, and disconnected from their work. Empathy is supposed to be part of our jobs, but we don't even feel supported ourselves. So should we be at all surprised that people don't trust the media? We've created a system that, by design, chips away at the very humanity that makes storytelling so meaningful. And maybe we shouldn't even have so many objective rules in the first place, because journalism isn't a laboratory science. It's an art, just a storyteller trying to make a little bit of sense out of the world. There's no one right or wrong way to do that, but everyone has sort of convinced themselves that there is. So we hide ourselves under the pretense that showing our hands will make us seem biased. But we are all smart enough to know that people have more than meets the eye. And so with no information to form an opinion, we have to ask ourselves, what are they hiding? And this is where all these dangerous elements combine to create a perfect storm. If journalists can't show their true selves to the people they're supposed to serve, then why should we trust them? Right now, trust in the media is sitting at one of the lowest points ever in recorded history. According to recent Gallup polling, only about 3 in 10 Americans say they trust the media even a fair amount. And actually, when you look at younger viewers, those numbers get worse. Now, granted, some of that does have to do with politics. But people also distrust journalists because it's hard to see and understand what they do. A 2024 study found exactly this. Audiences assume journalists are hiding bias, motives, or information, even when they're not, because they believe journalists are working off of a profit incentive. You can't even blame them. It's only human. When we can't see how something works, we have to use our imagination to fill in the blanks. And so as the media industry has remained stagnant, social media has arrived as this new challenger in the media landscape. And I say new, even though it doesn't feel new to you and I. The media industry is still catching up to it 20 years later. Social media brings storytellers who appear more human. They write informally on their blogs, or they make TikTok videos in their bedroom, or walking down the street talking into their earbuds, talking about things that they're passionate about, and candidly. Several studies now have shown that audiences reward these transparency signals, a little bit of roughness around the edges. They trust storytellers who talk to them like people, even if they lack the formal training. And so now we have this strange irony where audiences trust less trained communicators more, and broadcast journalism is stuck. Nowhere is this more apparent in the way that we cover the biggest stories: shootings, policy changes, hurricanes. In those cases, journalists rely on primary source documents like press releases or police reports or government statements. But people writing on social media don't need that. Case in point, the confusing headlines like this one from CNN that we all saw on the day of the first assassination attempt against President Trump in 2024. Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally. It's not rocket science. Anyone with access to social media could already tell what was going on that day. But because mainstream news outlets did not have official confirmation that shots were fired, they simply couldn't write it. You can argue it's for the best that journalists rely on facts, but why disregard common sense? In smaller newsrooms, this happens because they just don't have the people to go out and investigate anymore. That's called enterprising, and there are fewer enterprise stories than ever before today. The last data on this goes all the way back to 2000 from Pew, and it already showed a decisive decline. Now, granted, some media organizations have made efforts to step up their enterprise reporting. But overall, after 2 decades of layoffs, consolidation, and industry changes, something tells me those numbers are worse today. So with fewer resources for newsrooms to investigate, those institutions can bypass journalists entirely. Police departments, school districts, governments all publish their news directly to social media for community members to read for themselves. They get to set the narrative before journalists can come in and act as watchdogs. And media organizations just don't have the resources to challenge this dynamic. But to you, the viewers, it just looks like we don't care sometimes. So besides the few stories a day that reporters actually get to go out and investigate, the rest of our stories come straight from government institutions. Journalists have become mouthpieces for the establishment, and that is a disservice to humanity. You can't even blame individual journalists for this. It's the industry that pushes people towards sources that feel more human, even if they're less reliable or vetted. These 3 factors, the lack of transparency methods, the emergence of more candid forms of media, and, again, our own procedures, form the trust crisis. And unless we adapt to audiences' new expectations, we are not going to fix this problem. So how do we do that? Well, reporters have gone decades operating at a distance, both physically and emotionally. But people trust people. And as we've established, we trust them most when we feel like we can see who they really are. So we've just got to get closer. Now, some traditional media organizations have experimented with ways of showing transparency in their reporting, usually in print. These manifest themselves as disclosure boxes, how we reported this story at the bottom of an article. After several case studies, we've seen that these do help, but only when people notice them. Usually, they don't. This is where broadcast gets the advantage. It has a quality that we call pervasiveness. It means you don't always know when you're going to be exposed to it, and you have to listen to it in the order it's presented to you. This means that if we include transparency methods on TV, viewers literally cannot miss them if they tried. Now, that certainly doesn't fit the mold. But so what if we broke it? Why shouldn't we let people in on the process? By showing our work, we have to do work that is defensible and then defend it. This industry has taken trust for granted for far too long. And herein lies the irony, or maybe hypocrisy of the matter. Journalists exist to hold public officials accountable on behalf of the public, but very rarely can the public hold journalists accountable. The middleman is not exempt from accountability. It must happen at every step of the process. We can't combat conspiracy theories without it. We have just got to face our neighbors. And it's so obvious. And it turns out I'm not the first person to think of this. Back in the 90s, a genre known as civic journalism emerged. These avant-garde journalists made an effort to go out into their community, ask people what questions they had for their leaders, and then they would relay those questions to the leaders on their behalf. Several studies showed that communities who knew about these efforts showed higher levels of trust. And again, the challenge was visibility. The mainstream establishment laughed off these civic journalists. By the mid-2000s, they were gone. That brings us to today. With the advent of social media and all the accompanying technologies and cultural shifts that have come with it, the time is right to resurrect this approach at a much larger scale. Instead of using social media to post artificial-looking selfies or promote our work, we should be using it to engage with our neighbors, find stories, and learn what our viewers really care about. We shouldn't wait until people are already struggling to go out and help them, perhaps by handing them a bottle of water. We should be doing this every single day. And I'm probably making it sound really easy. I acknowledge it's not. Remember, none of this is objective, but I do think I have an approach that media executives can take to correct course before it's too late, and a shift viewers can take to help change our relationship with the media. First, I'm going to speak directly to the media executives, the ones with the most power over the direction of this industry. I'm asking you not just to allow, but to encourage differentiation. The people sitting at your desks are real people. They are not interchangeable. Allow them to be neighbors to the people they're supposed to be serving. Right now, if journalists show too much of themselves, the industry will outcast them. So protect them through this process. And to the rest of you, the viewers, that's most of you in the room here with me, I have something for you too. I need you to think critically about what you're watching, why, and how it was made. Consuming journalism is not a passive act. So ask questions to yourself, to the reporters. If you can't find the answer in one source, find another. Remember, each story is just one perspective. Once you find the commonalities, then you have found your true story. If change can happen on both sides, trust won't be some impossible problem that we're all doomed to talk about forever. Remember, don't overthink this. We are all neighbors. It's time we act like it. Thank you.